All right, Santa Claus is coming to town, and so are Adam Bjorn, Prime Sports co-founder Joe Brennan Jr., and yours truly, Matt Landis. Welcome to a Christmas week edition of Prime Suspects, and happy Festivus Eve to those who celebrate. Adam, with college football playoffs round 1 in the books, as well as week 16 in the NFL, how would you rate the week that was for Prime Sports and Betcris on a scale from Charlie Brown Christmas tree to Rockefeller Center Christmas tree?
So we had a Rockefeller Center Christmas tree week this week. It started Thursday night with a big leap off the bridge in Ohio. All in all, a really good week overall. Yesterday, not so good. Didn't hold on to all of the lead that we had. But yeah, overall, good week. That comeback, the few comebacks that happened this weekend, the overtimes, actually ended up working out in our favor overall. Miami college football wasn't good. Alabama the night before was great. Again, rode the up and down of the bowls, one good, one bad, one good. And then finally got that scrub touchdown by our James Madison team to cover that one and bring home the pros versus Joes.
Joe's Dukes coming through with the backdoor cover. And Adam, in addition to that college football playoff opener you mentioned between Alabama and Oklahoma, Friday night also brought us a boxing bout between Jake Paul and Anthony Joshua. Leading up to the fight, there was a lot of chatter on Twitter that this was the easiest money since Mayweather-McGregor, with DraftKings reporting a liability north of $100 million on Paul. How was the action you saw across Prime Sports and Betcris, and what did you make of the fight?
First of all, kudos to Jake Paul. Yeah, I know he broke his jaw in the end of it, whatnot, but he stood up against a, former heavyweight champion of the world for 4 rounds. He got hit good and proper. Sure, it looked like he was down his knees and praying for favors at different times through the fight. But, he picked the fight with a big bully. He got a broken jaw out of it. And the result was what I think everyone expected, maybe actually around a little longer than what most people would have thought. He danced around. He was clearly getting tired. Action-wise, not a ton of action. Anyone, if they were betting Paul. Was it easy money at like laying plus 800 for the bookmaker kind of thing? I don't think it was anything like the Mayweather-McGregor fight at all. Joshua by knockout was close to 300, 350 or more. So it was maybe easy money, better than bank interest, but you were still laying a lot shorter numbers than what you were with Mayweather versus McGregor back then. But, it was what it was. These guys are entertainers. Let's not fool ourselves. These guys, I was at the Tyson-Paul fight. What they put on was a spectacular evening of entertainment. Yes, we got a hell of a women's fight on the undercard as well. But that's what they are. Like, let's not pretend that this is the greatest lineup of boxers fighting each other in these matchups. It's entertainment. And I think, there's a lot of people that are happy with the outcome and that there was a broken jaw involved and whatnot. But again, kudos for him stepping into a ring with a guy a hell of a lot taller, hell of a lot bigger, hell of a lot more experience. And, they got out of what I think they both got like 90 million before taxes or something. Again, it was entertainment. People paid for it. People showed up. People watched it. And I think it was a decent effort in the end from Paul against Joshua. And Joshua probably showed that he lacked a little. He probably should have taken him out a round or two earlier.
And Joe, as our resident boxing expert, what did you take away from the fight and where the sports, as well as the entertainment to which Adam alluded, goes from here?
That was a disgraceful display of boxing. Look, I have no doubt that Anthony Joshua had some sort of very subtle rider in his contract, the way in Tyson's contract, Mike got a bonus if he went beyond 5 rounds, like if he didn't get knocked out within the first 5 rounds, which is a very subtle incentive for Mike to hold up Jake Paul, if at all it was going to go that way. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is some sort of very subtle thing in Anthony Joshua's contract that, motivate him to hold up that tomato can for about 4.5 rounds. And despite Jake Paul seeming to want to be on his knees doing God only knows what to Anthony Joshua. That was one of the more lurid displays of clinching that I've ever seen in boxing history. But I think Joshua probably could have executed him in the first 30 seconds, but probably had a financial incentive not to do so. When you look at it, this event, from a business sense, it was obviously successful for Netflix. It was obviously successful for Anthony Joshua. That was the biggest payday that guy ever got. And he was the heavyweight champion of the world. Okay. And, and Jake Paul, I'll tell you what, I sat around all weekend wondering, like, would I let somebody break my jaw for $100 million? And I still don't know the answer to that. I don't know if there's enough anesthetic out there to soften the blow for me. But, I think Jake Paul may be entering his Roddy Piper stage, accepting that he was the heel, the spoiler. The fact that he was getting the majority of the action, just the people that will vote with their money. It was the same thing with like when McGregor got the lion's share of the money against Mayweather. Anybody who knew boxing just knew that, God, that was just, they might as well have set fire to their money. And it's the same thing for anybody who bet on Paul here. I think Logan Paul put up more of a substantial fight trying to take away the polymarket chain from Anthony Joshua during the post-game interviews than Jake Paul did standing in there with him. But this is where we're at. I mean, you look at the contrast between the last two fights that Netflix has put on. Here you have the Jake Paul, Anthony Joshua fight, which is clearly just WWE entertainment. And you compare and contrast that with the Crawford versus Canelo fight, which was one of the greatest fights of the last 20 years. And so, yeah, I mean, as long as people are happy, as long as they know up front when you walk into a Jake Paul fight that what you're getting is something that's more like WWE, and they're still willing to spend their money on it. And amazingly, and I guess thank God for us, they're willing to bet on it. Great. So financial success from a boxing athletic competition perspective, total disgrace. And yeah, I watched the Canelo Crawford highlights for about a half hour after that to kind of bleach my eyes out and restore my faith in the sweet science.
All right. Well, I'm not sure how much our next segment is going to restore your faith in all of this, Joe, but we will move on from a bout in South Beach up the East Coast, about 1,200 miles closer to the North Pole, and a big week in Massachusetts. As we discussed last week, the Massachusetts Gaming Commission met to discuss reform on the practice of account limiting. And while that process is still playing out, another hot topic emerged on the docket last week in the form of DraftKings asking for the right to void a series of bets due to a technical error that led to almost $1 million in winnings by a bettor. For a bit more context here, the bettor placed 27 correlated parlays at inflated odds during October's American League Championship Series, winning 24 of the 27 wagers, and the commission declined DraftKings' request, emphasizing the error was the operator's fault. Adam, based on the reported facts, what do you make of the ruling, and how would you handle this scenario if it took place at Prime Sports or Betcris?
Well, unfortunately, this is sort of ran by the state regulators. Kind of thinking the story, New Jersey said no, Pennsylvania said yes, Massachusetts said no. So it's kind of, these are palpable errors. This is where, for a very, very long time, a big mistake lays. Now, on this one in particular, this player playing this thing, don't know what the exact odds should have been. Maybe there wasn't that much of a variance. Clearly, it looks like there was. But this seems like it was a bit of a human error as well. They designated the player as a non-participant, and you sort of go through a lot of the details, the back and forth of what ultimately led to this. This is a technology thing. This is a trader thing. I don't know which way this should have gone. I think the way that the states have laid it out, they've all played into what they're known for. New Jersey, really, you cannot get anything, no matter how obvious the error is, voided. Massachusetts seems to be playing that same game. For us, Ohio and Arizona seem to have a bit more logical response for the operator to when they look into these things, what's human error, what's technical error, and things like this. But, it was kind of comical where you sort of read through the article that you shared, and one of the DraftKings guys said, well, it was unfair to other patrons. I mean, what the hell does it have to do with other patrons?
What does that mean?
Yeah, this guy got bigger odds than other patrons. Like, that's the name of the game. It's called fixed odds betting, where generally not everyone's getting the same price on anything. So it's kind of comical sort of seeing from their angle. I 100% agree where they're coming from in a sense of what they're trying to do to get it voided. They don't want to pay out $1 million on their own fuck up, but it is what it is. And I think Massachusetts have followed the guidelines that they've followed all the way through. This wasn't anything that was against, the way they seem to have played everything out. So yeah, unfortunately for DraftKings and operators in a few of these states, it's 100% player protection. It's be damned if you make a fat finger error or a technical error or anything of that nature. So you've got to, know the rules of the game as you go into it and your expectations of getting out of it.
Joe, we'll get to account limiting shortly, but first, anything on your end when it comes to DraftKings and the void request?
This is the game. DraftKings probably, I mean, if anybody can absorb $1 million loss, it's DraftKings. Should they be making better investments in their risk management? Should they be trying to learn from this? Well, I hope they got $1 million plus education out of what happened and reinvest that into what they're doing with their risk management system. As far as should it have, shouldn't have, that's already determined by the regulators. You have states that are very pro player, states that are more pro operator. You're going to have to know what your exposure is going in here, and you just accept that. But it's like a bet. I mean, I've seen worse hands of poker, frankly, in Bobby's room back in the day in the Bellagio. I've seen somebody lose $1 million a hand because of a bad hand of cards, and they took it like a man. They took it like a pro. I think DraftKings, FanDuel, as a bookmaker, obviously you don't want to lose it, especially over a fat-fingered error, but that's the game. That's the game. That's what they signed up for.
All right, and shifting gears to account limiting, Joe, while there's a lot of support for the commission's focus on the topic, there's also the sense that it may be a classic case of too little, too late, as some bettors that have been limited could have moved to prediction markets or offshore, as summed up by Jeff Edelstein's December 19th article on ingame.com, headlined, "Massachusetts may tell bettors why they're limited, and I don't care." What do you make, Joe, of all of this when there's the notion that it's too late to rein in limiting, as well as how you think this ultimately nets out for participants across both sides of the counter?
Well, first of all, in a lot of ways, I'm sympathetic towards the Massachusetts regulators, this is a bit like closing the barn door after the horse is out. FanDuel, DraftKings, other operators have already done their damage with booting guys out of their shop or limiting them. The fact that now that they have to provide notice and a written reason why, it's like, well, they know why. Okay, that's a formality. There's no real path back in. There was none of the, well, if you're in a penalty box, you could potentially get back in, things like that. Do I think it's, end times as far as that? No, I don't. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how things progress with prediction markets. If there has been some leakage of those type of players into prediction markets, into offshore, I'd say if those guys are really sharp players, they were going to be putting liquidity over there anyway, right? All these guys want is another out. I was having a call earlier today with a guy who's great modeler for certain sports, but he's looking to get into become a B2B supplier. And when I asked him, why are you doing that? He said the real simple reason was just can't get enough money down. And, that's the challenge that sharp players have. And if things loosened up, if they, raise limits or, they eliminated limiting, or they came up with a scheme where there's minimum bets or things like that, those players would absolutely find their way back into the market and bring liquidity back in with them, if only to have one more out. So we'll see how the future plays out. If prediction markets stick, it's one more reason for states to become a little more proactive and thinking about how they can evolve, how they can make changes so they can make their state markets more attractive, so they can compete for those dollars that they may currently be losing to other venues.
And with that, we will shift gears to our final segment, and a bit of a mixed bag, ranging from naughty to nice, although it's probably going to be mostly the former. Adam, the FBI issued a public service announcement warning gamblers not to patronize illegal offshore sports betting and online casino platforms because of their, quote, significant consequences for the American public, the U.S. economy, and the integrity of sports betting in the U.S. Obviously, this isn't the first time authorities have sounded the alarms about the offshore betting world, but the timing is interesting given the proliferation of onshore gray market alternatives. So why do you think the FBI is focusing on offshore at this moment in time? And what do you expect, if anything, in terms of this leading to any meaningful enforcement action against offshore operators this time around?
I think this is using Joe's barn door again. I mean, there's probably as much gray in the US as there is out of it these days. Sure. I mean, it's like anything, whether it's buying shit online, buying it out of, from China versus the US and all these different things. Gambling's the same thing. There's some casinos that'll, you happen to win and they don't pay you, or there's protection. But we've seen over the last 6-8 months that now there's operators within the US that consumers don't have protection from either. So, I guess it's just their annual tap on the shoulder. Hey, go chase the boogeyman over here versus over there. And it's kind of I think it's falling on deaf ears. I think generally people in the marketplace, especially the offshore operators, I don't think they really even have the fear of anybody coming and knocking on their door right now because of so much of the gray market predictions, sweeps, the challenges within on that front. So sort of bigger huff and puff, but not much wind blowing from the wolf there. So I don't expect anything to come of it. It's just sort of repeat and rinse kind of thing that's been happening that I've seen for the last 25 years that I've been over this side of the world.
Well, speaking of huff and puff, Joe, Kalshi raised a lot of eyebrows last week with controversial news that it self-certified markets on the NCAA transfer portal, but said it had no immediate plans to actually offer them. The backlash was immediate from many, including the NCAA itself. And at a time when Kalshi appears to be operating with an inclination to ask for forgiveness over permission, I'd be curious as to how you'd set the odds they actually move forward with offering these markets versus listening to the court of public opinion.
I'd say it's maybe a 50-50 that they do this because it was pretty deafening. Somebody should have made a market. Will Joe Brennan and Charlie Baker of the NCAA ever agree on something? Because if you had bought, yes, you'd have been a winner. I found myself in the unusual position of being on the same side of whether these markets should be offered as the head of the NCAA. It's stupid. It's dumb. It's rife for corruption. It's rife for intimidation. We think people are yelling at athletes loudly now. Just imagine what it'd be like if we started offering these markets. Kalshi's response was about as stupid as I've ever heard a response to something. I compared it to, saying about drugs. It's like, yes, I bought drugs, but I'm not currently taking drugs, even though lots of people do take drugs. We currently have no intention of taking these drugs, but I did buy drugs, kind of thing. So why would you go to the trouble of self-certifying it, which again, isn't that the greatest thing? Not only do you give yourself the test, you grade your test and decide whether or not you passed. It's unsustainable. I get it. I've had more than a few people say, like, what is the end game here for Kalshi to continue to do this, to really push the accelerator? I'm sure they feel like they're just trying to land grab while the competition is limited, right? We don't know how long that's going to last. But at the same time, I really do feel like they're accelerating the backlash against them. I guess for being sportsbook people, we ought to be thankful for Kalshi doing this kind of stuff because they're making us look friggin' reasonable, aren't they? They look ridiculous with their approach towards this. And I just don't understand why they're doing it. It's totally unnecessary. They should probably be taking a more incremental, more cooperative approach to this. And instead, not only are their self-certified products getting more aggressive and outlandish, the rhetoric that they have out there in the marketplace, the proselytizing, whether it's the CEOs who are trying to say that they're trying to save everything from Western civilization to the working man and protect people who are getting laid off from their jobs being able to earn, to their proxies out there in Twitter badge land who anybody who even suggests that this is either sports betting or that maybe this isn't entirely legal or approved of and that the CFTC might not really be able to authorize this. They just bring it down in a wave of hectoring. Like, how dare you suggest this? Of course, it's obviously this. This is just getting kind of out of hand. And I guess if I have one wish for 2026 is that, things start to kind of even out here. We're spending less time talking about how prediction markets are in this ridiculous land grab, and then maybe more about, is there more of a symbiotic evolution between sportsbook and the prediction markets, especially now that how many sportsbooks have launched their prediction markets? I had DraftKings last week. Yeah, FanDuel today. I don't know. It seems like we're all kind of blending into one big cup of mochaccino.
All right, Adam, let's see if we can take this home on a more positive note, or at least a neutral note, as we always do, looking ahead to noteworthy action so far for the week to come across the football landscape. We've got the college football playoff quarterfinal matchups known, NFL Week 17 openers on the board. What's the biggest action you've been seeing so far in this latest betting cycle?
On the NFL side of it, your team, the Chargers, are getting a lot of money on Saturday against the Texans. Both the pros and the Joes are all over that one. Bengals have been bet pretty hard from 6 to 6.5. Now it's 7 minus money. Raiders at home to Giants. What a cracking game that one is. Money all over the Raiders. seriously, the Raiders have been the biggest bet team of the week. So I guess that performance against the Texans, warranted jumping all over the Raiders early on. That sort of opened up close to pick 'em now, 1 Raiders. And that was sort of the standout there. Rams, a little bit of money. I think that one's Monday night currently. But yeah, that's the bulk of it from there. On the colleges, nothing that was really jumping out like James Madison was a week ago. Again, all these big games are starting to get sort of decent money both ways. And a lot of it now, again, live betting has really been big last week. I was seeing more and more action come once the game's kicked off. And then again, your positions can change very rapidly.
I feel like when you mentioned the Chargers-Texans game, I had a thought to an annual topic this point every season, looking back at the Chargers-Cowboys from Sunday and a few games on the docket this week, thinking about trying to quantify motivation. We had the Chargers-Cowboys matchup lose a little bit of luster when Joe's Eagles won on Saturday, eliminating the Cowboys from contention. This week, thinking of games like Denver-Kansas City in a Christmas nightcap, a matchup that's lost enough luster to look like a lump of coal at this point. On Sunday, we've got Pittsburgh-Cleveland. Monday Night Football gives us Rams at the Falcons. Matchups where we have teams with something to play for against teams with seemingly nothing to play for. Adam, on your end, what do you do when it comes to trying to price in motivation from the outset? And how much of it is that classic notion of hanging a line and taking hits and letting things settle out wherever they do?
Yeah, well, that was kind of the interesting, and using that as this weekend. I mean, Kansas City Chiefs, been in the playoffs for a long time, been contenders, been winners. And I was surprised how much money came for Kansas City with the predicament they were in. Yes, it was the Titans who have been just, kicked the shit out of all season long. But it was our biggest game of the day. Like, we needed the Titans. And I was very surprised with, again, the injuries, the players available, that there was just that much money. I think, again, generally a lot of people, and it wasn't just Joe's, it was the pros as well. This game was really our biggest one of the day on Sunday. And there was no sweating at all from the outset. Titans are up and they just, went on their merry way. But that's the challenge right now is I did my millions picks on Friday night, got them in, looked at them, and then, went, I think 1-4, and my betting went 4-0. So, it's those couple of days of sort of analyzing the teams and the players available and then looking at the motivations and then a Saturday result kicking in for Sunday. And that's where, that Dallas game, well, again, Dallas was heavily bet, but that number went from 2-1 based off motivation, yet Dallas money just kept coming in, and that was our second biggest game of the day. So it ended up that our 2 biggest games of the day both collected, and they very much, I think, came into that motivation, like, are they up for it kind of games.
What's funny is, like, when you hear this motivation narrative being discussed, like, oh, one team has something to play for and the other team, they're out of the playoffs, something like. It's such a top-down way of looking at motivation. These people are friggin' professionals. And here's one thing. It's like, okay, your team might be dog shit and they might be out of it. But here's the thing. Normally, at least 2/3 of an NFL roster is on a either 1 or 2 year contract, okay? Where these guys is like, the guys who are going to be hitting the field, even if they're on some dog shit team, they're playing for their next contract. They can't just pack it in and then have their agent go to the next general manager they're sitting in front of for next year and say, like, well, of course my guys shut it down. The team wasn't going to win shit. People are going to be looking at film on these guys throughout. When you look at the coaching staff, especially on dog shit teams, those guys are probably coaching for their jobs. Like, all right, maybe they're not going to be in New York, either the Jets or the Giants, but they got to be someplace next year, right? Or are they just going to get out of football? So this notion that, like, oh, well, because a team has got nothing to play for because they're like 2-14 or something like that, and they're playing a playoff team. It's actually the playoff teams right now are thinking, like, how much effort do we really need to put into this? How much jockeying for seeding or should we be doing right now? And how much time should our starters be spending on the field because we've got the playoffs coming up? Like, right now, I'm really looking forward to seeing, like, what a dog shit game the Eagles-Commanders game is going to be, last game of the season, because there's no motivation for Philly right now they seem like they've got the 3rd seat locked in, and that's probably going to be their destiny. So if that's the case, why go out and risk anybody's knees, ankles, or concussions or anything like that? Whereas the Commanders, well, one, they want to get even for that 2-point conversion, right? Ooh. And then the other thing is all those guys are going to be playing for their contracts, and the same thing with the coaches. So People ought to do, I bet somebody could do well if they did more of a bottom up rather than a top down analysis on motivation in these last few games.
Well said, Joe, to tie a bow around this early Christmas gift of an episode. And like Adam said, in reference to Kansas City, Tennessee, the Titans went on their merry way, just as we'll go on ours. So to the audience, thanks as always for tuning in. Have a safe and Merry Christmas, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Prime Suspects. Register for Prime Sports at primesports.com and download the Prime Sports app. You can follow us on Twitter at PrimeSuspects_, at Joe Brennan Jr., and at Adam Bjorn 2. You must be 21 or over to play on Prime Sports. Always bet responsibly and within your limits. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.